Good? All right. I think we're going to jump right into it because the clock is ticking and we have an exciting panel today. Thank you for those of you who are joining us. We have a really interesting lineup of speakers coming from all different perspectives to talk about part two of this topic on can smarter sustainability unlock net zero. My name is Peter Houlihan, Executive Vice President of Biodiversity and Conservation at X Prize Foundation, where we are focused on incentivizing solutions to grand challenges in our world. And this entire field is certainly one massive category in that respect. And I'm going to start by doing a quick round of introductions and actually ask our speakers to share a little bit of the perspective that they're coming from different sectors, all approaching this at different angles. And so we'll just go in order of our seating here. Somebody who's no stranger to competition. We have Rick Fox joining us, who's co-founder and CEO of Partanna Global. Rick, can you share a little bit about Partanna's mission and approach and kind of motivation behind all of this?
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon. Our mission at Partanna started on the front line of climate, which is in the small island nation of the Bahamas, hit with devastation from Hurricane Dorian. We believe that development is not going anywhere anytime soon, and the impact of the developing world has come to our shores, and we're slowly going underwater. So when we look at climate refugee status, it is in our future if we don't make a change. And so for me personally, along with our company, our drive is to change the way we build in the world in a more nature-positive way by taking upscaled industry waste and turning it into feedstock for good, and building carbon-negative building materials for the construction industry.
Amazing. Certainly an inspiration to see what you all are doing. Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Dan Hammer, who's a managing partner of Ode. Dan, can you share a little bit about your journey with Ode and the approach of data modeling especially?
Sure. So Ode is a tech and design agency for the environment. We have the honor of building the back end and design and front end for Al Gore, for Google, for World Wildlife Fund, and notably her Royal Highness Princess Rima and her Oceans project that will launch very soon called Wave. And over again, we end up building these environmental data platforms. And we've ended up building so much of the same 80%, the first 80% over and over again, that ultimately about a year ago, we started to work on building and training an extraordinarily large AI model for on-Earth observation. So it's the P and the T of ChatGPT. Instead of trained on text, it's trained on Earth observation, which allows us to answer questions as mundane as like, when was there heavy machinery last seen on my favorite hiking trail? Or how much aquaculture is there on the coast of Bali, for example? The same sort of technology that allows 8th graders now to cheat on their homework through ChatGPT is available in order to measure and monitor changes on the Earth's surface.
Amazing. Thank you, Dan. Next, we have Kola Karim, who's the Group Managing Director and CEO of Shoreline Group, coming from a perspective of the oil and gas industry, energy industry. Can you share a little bit about your journey over the past few decades of building this industry? And then later on, we'll talk about maybe where we're looking to go in the future.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me. I run Shoreline Group. We're a family-owned group, Sub-Saharan Africa focused, and our business areas are focused around oil and gas exploration, production, gas processing in that spot, then construction of heavy infrastructure. And our journey has been an amazing one. Sustainability is very important today. Even if you do not, in Africa, the banks are forcing you to. So with that in place, we've had to come up with a lot of very sustainable, innovative, focused ways in trying to deliver the projects, in making sure they've got value and is accretive in creating jobs that will add value across sub-Saharan Africa. We are very decisive in what we do, and that way you have to be intentional because the banks are breathing down the necks of all the majors seeking for finance. And as you all know, sub-Saharan Africa, to grow and attain the level of growth that we want, there is a lot of capital required. And to do that, you have to make sure you're delivering those projects in a very sustainable way in making sure value is created across board.
Thank you. And speaking of that, accountability is such a big part of all of this equation, the claims that companies are making these days. We have Rebecca Minguela from Clarity AI, the founder and CEO. It's fascinating to learn what you're doing in terms of transparency in particular. Could you share a little bit more about Clarity AI?
Yeah, Clarity AI is a technology platform to help mainly investors and companies assess their social and environmental impact, including, of course, their net zero targets, tracking, and setting goals, KPIs. We started the company 8 years ago, and the company was already called Clarity AI, so we were already doing AI 8 years ago. More recently, of course, including Gen AI technologies, we are about 340 people, mainly engineering, and we have invested more than $200 million into the platform. And it's mainly in the context of net zero specifically. We help investors like large asset managers like BlackRock or large banks to assess their net zero targets and goals in their portfolios, and hopefully optimizing their portfolios to achieve those, which is even more important right now that the energy consumption and the energy demand is increasing, and most of the estimates that most of the companies had on net zero with the use of AI right now are actually moving targets, right? So let's hope we develop more positively and rapidly there.
Absolutely. It's important to be tracking. And Dan, going back to you on the modeling sense, could you elaborate a little bit on how you all work in that space and maybe ways that can inform companies and investors on what decisions they're making or track who's where and who's doing what?
Yeah. There's a tremendous amount of information that's currently stranded in satellite imagery. That is, it's mixed up in these pixels and bits and bytes as opposed to the semantic information that we would need in order to make decisions about our natural resources. And with these large models, we can now organize that information. Right now, all of that information inside of satellite imagery is just jumbled up like a pile of books on a library floor. And these very large models, almost magically, I've been working in this stuff for like 20 years, and it still feels very magical to me that it's able to organize it in ways that are actually useful for people to make those triangulating small queries that are required in order to move resources and to have a sense of assurance that it's precise and relevant enough to actually to move those resources. A good example of this was actually, it hit the front page of the New York Times last week, where there's been illegal chemical deforestation in the Amazon, done by the suppliers to Costco and McDonald's, for example. And this was in plain sight. You could literally see this happening from satellite imageries every 8 days, but it was a pattern that was just slightly too subtle to like reach the sort of surface of existing tools and technologies, like one that I built called Global Forest Watch to track deforestation from satellite imagery. It was like slightly too subtle. But with these extraordinarily large models and more rich data sets, you can make that available not just to data scientists or AI research engineers, but the supply chain managers, for example, in the same way that they'd sort of use Google Maps to pick their Starbucks, the idea of making that very tangible where people already are consuming information.
Yeah, very helpful at that scale. And Rick, you all have been working in the Bahamas at, as you said, a very local scale on the forefront of climate realities today, both in terms of innovating new climate resilient approaches and adaptive ones. But can you speak a little bit more about approaching both of them at the same time out of necessity and urgency?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the competition against time. Time is something that we're challenged with here as we look to not only mitigate, but also find resilience. In our case, in the Bahamas, as we slowly go underwater, our homes are coastal habitats, and the resistance to salt-based flooding destroys our homes. So how do you continually dig yourself out of that hole? You know, what used to be once in a while to every year now, with the Hurricane Alley that we live in. So we approached the challenge of finding hurricane-proof, resilient homes that are, through our materials at Partanna, are not only avoiding the heavy emissions that come with the cement manufacturing, but through the resilience of our binder, we also can meet salt water and get stronger. So now we no longer have to rebuild a home every 2 or 3 years. We can actually build that home once and have it last. So the beauty of what we're able to do is not only avoid all the heavy clinkering to get to that, so we avoid that negativity of 9% of the emissions that cement generates into our atmosphere, that heats up our planet, that then heats up our ocean, that then kills our coral, as you know. We also have the magic of chemistry at play for our binder, where we actually, through the magic of chemistry, these raw materials come together and they absorb and interact with CO2, removing that from our atmosphere as well. So you get your avoidance and you get your removal, which is your mitigation and your resilience.
And a model for how we can build resilient communities in the future.
Green communities are on the way.
Absolutely. Kola, I'd love to turn to you in terms of the industry and where it's going, in oil and gas. And before the panel, you were talking about investing across many different parts of the spectrum of different forms of energy, but different parts of industry, construction. Can you talk about where you see all of this going in terms of energy transition and a little bit of the balance of the demands and the economic constraints and where you all are looking forward in the future?
Thank you. I think the dynamics in Africa is different, right? Africa contributes about 3% of global emissions, but if you look at where the world is going, there's a certain standard set up from the first world, so to speak, and benchmarking Africa on the same parameters. That would be unfair, right? You have a continent with 1.3 billion people, 60% under the age of 30. So that's a very aggressive growth position, and these are very young people who need jobs. So to balance what we want to achieve, the critical areas are very simple. Gas, there's over 650 TCF of gas on the continent. The first quick win is focused on gas flaring. Gas knockout projects, and that's one of the things we've implemented, a gas knockout project, and we're now re-injecting that into LPG, so cleaner cooking fuels as transition, CNG into cars and stuff, and putting natural gas back into industries and fueling growth. Because look, you've got to look at Africa from a different prism, right? If you look at the first world parameters, you've had your first industrial revolution, second, third, and some are going on their fourth. But Africa's not had its first. So if we have to benchmark on the same parameters, it will be difficult because it's a young, restless population that needs jobs and creativity around that. So there's got to be an inflection point in making sure we'll get the targets met, but at the same time focus on creating the right type of jobs that will enable this young population to continue to grow and also sustain the security on the continent, because idle hands, as you know, creates problems.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your perspective on this. Rebecca, heading back to you, I think in terms of policy and progress, can you speak a little bit about where you see bottlenecks perhaps being in terms of the modeling that you're projecting looking forward? How is regulation too slow? What are some of the inhibitors of being able to inform investors and companies properly about their progress and transition moving forward?
So regulation, there are more than 800 regulations right now around ESG, and of course not all of them consistent with each other. So it's important to have technology to make sure that you don't have to be compliant with each of those regulations that might be applicable to you and have a lot of cost or redundancy linked to that. AI, of course, is a way to try to address that lack of consistency across all the regulations. And right now, it's not just the regulations around sustainability or net zero, it's also the regulations anti-ESG or net zero. So there are more than 160 legislations issued last year in 37 states in the US. So it's not just the regulations pro ESG, but also potentially anti-ESG regulations right now. So as you can imagine, for investors and companies, it's getting more and more complicated. So the adoption of AI in this case is critical because there is also a lack of talent and knowledge in the companies. Mainly if you go to small and medium-sized companies or asset managers, small and medium-sized asset managers, that they have to comply with so many regulations, but they don't have the tools to do it, right? So it's, that's how Clarity also provides the technology to help them do it at the scale.
Do you think that's maybe then a gap or an opportunity in terms of the need for capacity and training to enhance this across all sectors?
There is an opportunity, but at the same time, it's generating a lot of backlash to have so many different regulations in which investors or companies don't see enough standardization. The reality is that it happens with any other industry. So even for accounting, there are no clear standards in Europe and in the US that are the same, or companies report EBIT and profits and revenue in different ways. So it's not that we should expect a full standardization, but being such a complex issue and politicized issue like it is, I think it's important to provide tools that help those companies and investors to report.
Dan, as somebody who's familiar with lack of standardization in many different data sets and models or challenges of interoperability, what's your perspective on the way forward to unify people around approaching this?
That's a good question. We're starting to see, for example, language and Earth observation and many other sources of data able to be pulled together through what is now known, and there's a term for it now, it's the multimodal foundation models. Like the idea of being able to interact with different types of data, either visual or audio data, through language is extraordinarily helpful for those small and medium-sized enterprises that don't necessarily have the capacity to, groups that can code or data scientists. But certainly everyone knows how to, and is getting better and better at this idea of prompt engineering, or just asking questions of the data like you would a friend. And so the idea of these multimodal foundation models are, and I don't mean to be like I am bullish on AI, but I'm not an apologist. Just the idea of just saying that there are some really powerful ways in which this stuff can be used to make data more accessible to more people.
Absolutely. Kola, you're laughing. I'm curious to hear your reaction to that.
No, he's right. Look, the true position is when I equate everything we've said and looking at Africa as a continent, right? The shortage of infrastructure. But it's got to be built. But do we build it the old way or build it a sustainable way? So reality is there's always going to be that inflection point of ESG in operation, and sustainability has got to be the core around it. Because if not, then the airports will not get built. The railway, as an example, is a massive shifting position of sustainable way of building to help emissions, right? Because the less cars on the road, the better it is for the planet, right? Because of the emissions. And railway emits far less, especially now when there's electric trains. So this is part of what is being put in play right across the continent. But the key factor is always going to be funding to make sure it happens. Because without that, we could talk from now till then. It's not going to happen. So that's why I started laughing, because it's all about everything's got to work together in making sure we deliver value across board.
Great response there. And with the time that we have remaining, I want to ask each person. We have leaders in many different spaces here providing unique and important perspectives on all of this. And Rick, right before this, you were kind of discussing how you arrived in doing this now, where now you're working with concrete and coral restoration, and almost how did I end up here? But it's fantastic to be doing this, and feeling like you were a climate innovation imposter, but realizing we all need to be doing this. Could each of you talk a little bit about what you think the role is now for leaders, CEOs in each of your own respective fields to be on top of leading the way forward for this?
Well, I think in this leadership role that we all share, education is obviously the foremost thought in each of our minds, probably bringing people across that Grand Canyon of understanding of why this is so important, why AI is going to be an added value to all of our lives, why the idea of taking this waste that we've created and this negativity from the development that we've built our existence under, and turning that into a choice, like you said, to have a sustainable route as opposed to the old way. Innovation has been around for centuries. We innovate constantly. So when I look at the industry of construction, and I look at what we can mean to construction when it comes to nature-positive solutions and choices, for me, I come from the world of entertainment and sports. I didn't expect to be a climate technologist. I am not a material scientist, but I'm here to do my part. My part started just defending my own country, looking to be an added value to my homeland, and then building that first carbon negative home that avoided all negativity, that removed CO2, that became the first example of what a home can look like when it's devoid of all Portland cement, and then the generation of carbon offsets and credits that could be used as a down payment for a homeowner in a positive route got me so excited. It became a solution for the world. How did I end up in this region? This region has brine, the #1 waste material, the two commodities we use, water and cement, #1 and #2. There's a water scarcity. We use 3% of water to make concrete. We don't need that fresh water to make our concrete. So I look at these challenges and I say, if not us, who? And we may be first, but others will follow.
Amazing. Dan, no pressure, but you have to follow that one.
I'm sorry. I had a little practice in teamwork and teams and stuff and all those.
Well, I know data and design. If I try to do anything else, I will fail. But that means that I can play my part authentically alongside economists and scientists and storytellers and advocates as that tech person on the table, and I'm excited to play that part.
Well said. Kola?
I think Africa sits on a very good platform. Today, 60% of the energy on the continent is hydro, 40% is fossil fuel. Right? So if you think about that, there's huge land mass. So again, carbon credits in controlling emissions, it's very strong. But what's important is leadership and purposeful leadership in making sure that works together for the greater good of the people of the continent.
Well said. Rebecca, a final word?
Yeah, I mean, the final one I will say for me is that I would like to see the CEOs and the leaders being more consistent and persistent with the hype and the trends. It's a pity that the sustainability trend, for example, is now winding down slightly, even though it's such an important topic and everyone believes in it genuinely. You see that being deprioritized sometimes, which I think leaders need to be more consistent, longer term, and bolder when they make a decision in continuing with the path, regardless of politicized trends. That's what I will say.
Persistence, leadership, collaboration, innovation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on what could have been a multi-hour panel. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.